Chapter 1051, Final Destruction. Translator, Sitalan Editor. The Azurewood Great World is about to collapse. With the developments so far, nothing could stop the Divine Tree from dying at that moment. Felicitas Rainlord was severely injured, so he could not do much. The only person he could rely on was Rhyme Divine Lord. Leave quickly. Felicitas Rainlord wanted to bring Iyun out with him even if consumed the last ounce of strength in him. However, just as he approached Iyun, he suddenly felt a strong repulsion that threw him backward. Oh! Felicitas Rainlord's expression changed. He saw Iyun covered in the Divine Tree's halo, and it had formed an invisible wall that prevented him from approaching. Iyun! Felicitas Rainlord could see that Iyun's eyes were tightly closed as if he had lost consciousness. He wanted to wake Iyun up, but from the looks of it, Iyun was connected with the Divine Tree's bloodline. He believed that if he tried hard enough, it was still possible to escape, but he never expected that Iyun would turn a deaf ear toward his calls. If the Azurewood Great World were to explode, where Iyun was situated was probably where the center of the explosion was. Time was of the essence, and there was no clear indication how long more the Azurewood Great World could last. Felicitas Rainlord still wanted to find Shui Ningxuang. But with Iyun in such a state, he was unable to bring him along. Senior, I don't think there's a need for you to worry. At that moment, Yuingsha spoke out. Iyun is a person acknowledged by the Divine Tree. Although the Azurewood Great World is about to be destroyed, with the Divine Tree's strength, it should not be difficult for it to protect Iyun even if it's about to wither and die. Yuingsha had a bloodline inside her that was related to the Divine Tree, so she was able to vaguely comprehend the Divine Tree's intention. Felicitas Rainlord frowned. He had also thought of the possibility that Yuingsha mentioned, but he still remained worried. After all, it was just a hypothesis. What if it was wrong? As Felicitas Rainlord was pondering over the matter, he saw that the halo encompassing Iyun intensifying. Large amounts of energy were flowing out of the halo, which caused Felicitas Rainlord to shudder. It was an energy he absolutely could not withstand. At that point in time, it was like a sun had appeared out of nothing, and Iyun was located within the sun as though he was a golden crow that was being given life through the burning flames. Felicitas Rainlord could not help but continue retreating, and when the halo reached an extreme intensity, Felicitas Rainlord suddenly saw Iyun's figure turn into a blur. His aura was gradually dissipating as though he was about to disappear. Oh! Felicitas Rainlord was startled. He could sense the fluctuation in spatial laws that were about to send Iyun away. The moment Iyun was sent away, Felicitas Rainlord had no idea how long it would take him to find Iyun. At that moment, thousands of thoughts flashed across his mind. He finally gritted his teeth and took out a dark golden piece of paper from his interspatial ring. If anyone were to see the dark gold piece of paper, they would go mad, because that was the remnant page of the 10,000 Fey Divine Canon. It was also his most valuable cultivation technique. Previously, he had not passed it down to Iyun due to Iyun's low cultivation realm. But now, Iyun was about to be sent away. By stealing his heart, he directly shot the 10,000 Fey Divine Canon at Iyun. By giving it to him prematurely, Iyun would then be able to cultivate it by himself with the remnant page of the 10,000 Fey Divine Canon. It was a divine item formed from heaven and earth laws, so the divine light that had repelled Felicitas Rainlord did not stop the 10,000 Fey Divine Canon remnant page, allowing it to reach Iyun. At the next moment, the halo became even brighter as Iyun and the 10,000 Fey Divine Canon remnant page disappeared completely. The immense energy also gradually dissipated as the halo lost its luster. Finally, there was nothing left in front of Felicitas Rainlord. Nothing was left behind. The Divine Tree had transported him and the 10,000 Fey Divine Canon away. Upon coming to such a realization, Felicitas Rainlord heaved a sigh of relief. With the Divine Tree safely transporting Iyun away, Iyun's safety was finally assured. However, Felicitas Rainlord did not know Iyun's destination. He needed to recuperate as fast as possible once he returned so that he could search for Yi Yun. However, it was unlikely to be an easy matter searching for Yi Yun. He even felt for the first time that he should establish a faction, one just like the Immortal Rain sect, a large faction that spanned the entire 10,000 Fey Empyrean heaven. Such matters could then be done in a much easier fashion. Let's leave quickly. Felicitous Rain Lord grabbed Yu Yingsha and Shuhi and summoned a mobile abode before flying out of the restricted zone. At that moment, the Divine Tree's restricted zone had collapsed, so there was no obstruction in the way. Fairy Rhyme, I'm severely injured, so I'll need to rely on you in a while. Don't worry, I'll definitely do my best. Due to the rupturing of the restricted zone, Rhyme Divine Lord had also seen Yi Yun's disappearance. She knew that if Yi Yun were to not perish, he would definitely be an extremely strong warrior of the world. Despite being only at the Dao manifestation realm, Yi Yun's monstrous talent would make Divine Lords lower their statures to take the initiative to befriend him. Boom! 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 The Azurewood Great World continued collapsing. Even the towering Divine Tree began to tremble violently. One branch after the other fell to the ground before sinking into it. The Divine Tree that had stood erect for hundreds of millions of years had finally welcomed its moment of destruction. The world was being compressed and the entire Azurewood Great World was beginning to collapse with the Divine Tree at its core. Boom! 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 The annihilation power of the collapsing world surged wantonly toward the Divine Tree. Rhyme Divine Lord led Felicitous Rain Lord and company to a distance far away from the center of the explosion. They watched helplessly as the world began shrinking. Everything in the world, land, mountains, rivers, oceans, and even space and time, were gathering toward the Divine Tree. It was like a skyscraper collapsing to its foundation once the foundation was destroyed. At the next moment, Rhyme Divine Lord and Felicitous Rain Lord heard the bronze giant issue an angry and painful bellow. The duo immediately understood what was happening with the destruction of the Azurewood Great World. The Divine Tree was using its last bit of energy to collapse everything in the Azurewood Great World so as to inflict a heavy injury on the bronze giant. The destructive power of a world was extremely terrifying, to begin with. Even stars could go supernovae, and when such energy was compressed into a tiny area of space, the destructive force was unimaginable. Would the bronze giant die? Felicitous Rain Lord did not know the answer to the question. He only felt that the Divine Tree had chosen to shine in its final moments before ending its life. And such fireworks that could light up the universe through the consumption of its life made him feel meant. They were pursuing the peak of martial arts, but in the face of the entire universe, they were too weak. And all of this had been seen by Yi Yun. After he was enveloped by the Divine Tree's light, he was sent hurtling through the void. The starry sky and endless river of stars were fleeting in front of Yi Yun. He did not know how long he had been floating for and how far he had traversed. The only thing he knew was that the tiny Divine Tree seed in his dantian had already sprouted a lush green sapling. Yi Yun had clarity of mind. However, his meridians, flesh, and blood seemed to be undergoing a metamorphosis which prevented him from moving. He knew that Felicitous Rain Lord had left the remnant page of the 10,000 Fey Divine Canon with him at the final moment. There was no need to elaborate on its value. The act only made him feel more grateful to Felicitous Rain Lord's favor to him as a master. Follow current novels on topenovelfull.com. Chapter 1052, Sun Burial Sansi. Translator, Cetulin Editor. In the northwestern region of the Central Prefecture, there was a vast desert named the Sun Burial Sansi. The legends told of a blazing sun falling into a sea that evaporated the sea dry. The crash formed a huge indentation in the ground, and after an endless period of time, the sandstorms leveled the place flat. It turned the area into a desert named Sun Burial Sansi, an apt name for a place that had previously buried a sun. As a desert, the Sun Burial Sansi should have been uninhabited, but contrary to that, there were 7 big cities in the vicinity of the Sea of Sand. They were bustling with several large merchant alliances, alchemist alliances, auction houses, and even assassination organizations. They had strongholds in these cities with innumerable warriors entering in and out of these cities on a daily basis. There was only one reason the Sun Burial Sandsea produced many items of great value. Every year, large hordes of people would come to the Sun Burial Sandsea in search of treasures. However, the desert was fraught with dangers, with many people eventually succumbing to the yellow sand and turning to withered bone. At that moment, a sand boat was slowly cruising through the endless desert. Such sand boats were extremely expensive to construct, and they were built by refining masters. They were powered by the energy from world stones, and they hovered a few feet above the desert. From afar, they looked no different from the ships on an ocean. In front of the sand boat was a tandem of powerful steeds. Steeds that could run in the desert were known as Azure Lin horses. These horses were bigger than camels, and they could carry thousands of kilograms of items while still being able to travel great distances every day. Sun Tai, one of the leaders of the armed escorts of the sand boat, was riding on one such Azure Lin horse. He had spent decades on the Sun Burial Sandsea, so his wealth of experience made him greatly familiar with the big merchant alliances and family clans in the 7 cities around the Sun Burial Sandsea. He was also thoroughly familiar with the various dangers of the desert. "Oh, there's something in front," one of the armed escorts suddenly said. Sun Tai had great vision, so with a nonchalant sweep with his eyes, he had seen a person lying on his back in the desert several hundred meters away. Such a situation was not rare in the desert, especially in the extremely strange Sun Burial Sandsea. It was common for people to lose their sense of direction, and having consumed all their provisions, they would end up dying in the desert before being covered by the dust storms and eventually disappearing. Sun Tai had seen such situations many a time. Due to the vastness of the desert and the burning hot sun, a person was only 2 to 4 hours away from death after falling unconscious. Hence, the people that Sun Tai encountered most of the time would have been dead for days or would have already turned into dried corpses. But this time, having witnessed another such scene left Sun Tai completely dumbfounded. He had traveled the desert for decades, but he had never seen such a fascinating scene. The person had obviously fainted on the desert, but the dust storms had not buried him in any way. And what was most amazing was that in 100 feet radius around him as the center, there were lush green plants growing in the desert. Some of the grass even bloomed tiny wildflowers. They even seemed to be engaging in a contention for beauty and fascination. If he had not seen this scene in a desert, Sun Tai would have believed that he had come to a small patch of grassland. An oasis? An oasis was the first thing Sun Tai thought of. However, the Sun Burial Sandsea was somewhat special as it had been reduced to such a state after burying a son. Therefore, oases were extremely rare. The oases in the desert were usually built up by array formation masters, but Sun Tai had almost never seen such a tiny patch of an oasis in the desert. It was unlikely that the grass grew because of the unconscious person, was it? Such a thought flashed across Sun Tai's mind, but he immediately shook his head and laughed at himself. What was he thinking? How could a person cause the desert to grow green grass? If he truly had the ability, how could he have fainted in the desert? What's the matter? At that moment, a yellow-dressed girl in a maidservant getup came to the sandboat's bow. She looked about 17 or 18. "We saw a person, but it's unknown if he's dead." "It's no big deal," Sun Tai responded simply. His modus operandi of encountering such situations was to ignore it. Traversing through the Sun Burial Sandsea was fraught with dangers, to begin with. It was possible that danger lurked where the dead were found, so it was best avoiding those places. At that moment, the maid-servant had clearly seen the peculiar scene not far away. A young-looking man in tattered clothes was surrounded by rings of flowers and grass. They seemed to surround and prostrate before him. What was going on? At that moment, Sun Tai said, "That person is extremely peculiar. I didn't think of it a while ago, but now, on second thought, the growing of this flowers and grass in the desert might not be something good. It might be the trap of some monster, and that fellow ended up lying there because he succumbed to it. Sun Tai gradually became more certain of his analysis. There were unclean things in the desert, and many warriors with impressive cultivation levels were killed because of various temptations. The yellow-dressed maidservant could not make a decision. After returning to the sandboat's cabin, she came out seconds later and said, "Miss says that saving a life is better than building a 7-storied pagoda for the gods. Go check if he's still alive. If he is, save him." With the mistress saying so, Sun Tai naturally had to do as he was ordered. He reluctantly rode a steed over and became extremely cautious when he approached the patch of plants. It was as though a hidden fey beast was hiding in it. However, danger did not rear its head even after he saved the youth. When Sun Tai carried the youth, he did not realize that after he turned around, the flowers and grass swayed in the gentle wind as though they were bidding the youth farewell. Many of the grass released their seeds in the wind after bidding him farewell, allowing their seeds to disperse in the wind to find a spot where they could germinate. Perhaps such a search would last decades or even more than a century. The sentiment of the blades of grass reached the youth's heart as he could perceive them clearly. Although he looked like he had fallen unconscious, he was aware of everything around him. The youth was Yi Yun, who had been transported here by the divine tree after the collapse of the Azure Wood Great World. Yi Yun did not know how far he had traveled in spacetime, but from the beginning to the end, his mind was extremely clear. He knew that his body was undergoing a fascinating transformation. Such a transformation should have been a good thing, but the situation left him somewhat at a loss whether to laugh or cry. Although he was awake, he realized that he could not move at all. The divine tree seed had sprouted in his dantian, spreading ceaseless vitality throughout his body. The power was no trifling matter. He knew that his body was much, much stronger than before. When he was being sent away, Yi Yun had to travel through countless spatial storms, and while doing so, his body was not protected by energy at all. He had used the strength of his flesh to withstand the bombardment of the spatial storms. Although Yi Yun remained immobile, his lifeblood was exuberant. His physical defense was extremely high, and it was impossible for any typical person from harming him. Yi Yun was not worried about his safety, but it was inappropriate for him to remain immobile. He had actually been lying in the desert for half a month. Due to the powerful vital energy in his body, a few grass seeds had landed beside him and germinated, eventually forming a tiny oasis. During this period of time, there were several merchants that had passed him by, but all of them had avoided him. It was only today that there was a group of people traversing the desert which decided to bring him along with them. It made Yi Yun give a bitter smile inwardly. It was good that he was being taken away. It was definitely not a comfortable experience while being sunned in the desert for half a month. Yi Yun's identity was unknown. So although he was rescued, he was not sent onto the sand boat. Instead, he was put in a carriage. After the maidservant checked on Yi Yun's breathing, she immediately reported to her mistress. "Miss, the youth is still alive, but he is unconscious." "All right, let Mr. Sun take a look at him. Perhaps he can be saved." Chapter 1053, Central State Divine Territory. Translator, Sitalan Editor. The group that had saved Yi Yun was the Divine Secrets Trading Company from Jade Luster City. It was definitely a notable faction in Sun Burial Sand Sea. The merchant alliance it belonged to was everywhere in the 7 cities around the desert, so it was known by everyone. The Divine Secrets Trading Company was extremely wealthy. Ignoring the luxurious sand boat, even a side carriage was drawn by 4 splendid-looking Azure Lin horses. Azure Lin horses were large, to begin with, so the carriages they pulled were even larger. The carriage that Yi Yun was in was luxurious. Inside it was a room that not only had a bed, carpet, and chairs, there were even several compartments. In addition to the array set up in the carriage was strangely stable despite the fast speeds of the 4 Azure Lin horses. The treatment that Yi Yun received left many of the escorts unhappy. He was only a half-dead traveler that they had saved, but he enjoyed such a luxurious carriage. As for them, they had to stay outside in the sun and get exposed to the elements. The punk was truly one lucky fuck. To think that I need to stop my elixir refinement midway to save someone who fainted in the desert. A gray-robed elder came into Yi Yun's room. He felt somewhat impatient when he took a glance at Yi Yun as he verbalized his unhappiness. The maidservant that was standing beside the old man said with a placative smile, "Miss is a kind person. What's more, Grandmaster Sun's alchemy skills are first-rate when placed in the entire Central State Divine Territory. Wouldn't saving a youth be at your fingertips?" The maidservant's words were sweet, and indeed, the elder enjoyed the flattery. However, he knew in his heart that his alchemy and medical skills were definitely not first-rate in the entire Central State Divine Territory. Fine, I'll be kind and save his life. Consider this punk lucky. As the gray-robed old man said those words, he sat in front of Yi Yun. At that moment, Yi Yun's eyes were tightly closed, but there were tumultuous waves roaring in his heart. Central State Divine Territory. The name was extremely familiar with Yi Yun. He had a great memory, so a simple recall allowed him to remember that back in the God Advent Tower at the Great Empress Mystic Realm, he had been shown the history of Azure Yang Lord rising to the rank of Divine Lord. Having achieved success and winning recognition, Azure Yang Lord had established a country, and the name he called his land was the Central State Divine Territory. Could this be the Yang God Emperor in heaven? Yi Yun was alarmed. The collapse of the Azurewood Great World had sent him to the Yang God Emperor in heaven in one go. Wasn't this too far? The 12 Empyrean heavens were extremely distant from one another. Even a Divine Lord needed to expend a great deal of time and energy in order to shuttle between the 12 Empyrean heavens. Yi Yun began sweeping his surroundings with his perception. After fusing with the Divine Tree Seed, his perception had increased by leaps and bounds, so he could easily cast it out hundreds of kilometers and even penetrate barriers that he couldn't in the past, such as Chaos Stones. Yi Yun knew very well that his perception had completely metamorphosized. His survey of the surroundings confirmed his suspicions. He had truly arrived in the Yang God Empyrean heaven. In the 10,000 Fey Empyrean heaven, the people he encountered were 99% Fey race. But in this area, the countless number of people he discovered were humans with pure bloodlines. They had nothing to do with the Fey. Yang God Empyrean heaven, Central State Divine Territory. Years ago, I was indebted to Azure Yang Lord, and today, I have come to the place where Azure Yang Lord rose in prominence. This is probably fated. Yi Yun muttered to himself inwardly. At that moment, the gray-robed elder had begun probing Yi Yun's meridians. Although Yi Yun could not move, he was not too worried about his safety. Firstly, his physical body was strong, making it extremely difficult for others to harm him. Secondly, his body contained a vibrant vitality. The power that came from the Divine Tree Seed was no trifling matter. Back when he was lying in the desert, there had been evil phantoms that attempted to devour his lifeblood, but the moment they entered his meridians, they were annihilated by the vital power. The gray-robed elder was actually not too concerned about healing Yi Yun, but the moment he probed Yi Yun's meridians, his face turned into that of shock. A few seconds later, he turned alarmed. How could it be? Grandmaster Sun, how is he? Odd, very odd. This youth's meridians are filled with life. I've never seen such powerful amounts of vitality in my life. The gray-robed elder began to find something amiss. He had probed the meridians of many warriors, but none had given him such a feeling. Then, why is he still unconscious? The maidservant asked. Well, the gray-robed elder frowned as he felt somewhat embarrassed. It had just been said that such a trivial ailment would be at his fingertips, but he had ended up encountering such a strange situation which he was clueless about. He knew that the person was definitely not pretending to be unconscious, but he was completely befuddled by the underlying cause. He attempted feeding a pill to Yi Yun. It melted the moment it entered his mouth and turned into an essence that merged into Yi Yun's body. Oh! It was absorbed so fast? The gray-robed elder was slightly astonished. The pill he had given Yi-Yun was quite an impressive one. He even felt the pinch when he gave it to Yi-Yun. Typical warriors who ate it might suffer instead of being nourished by it. The medicinal essence in it might be so strong that it could cause one to vomit blood. He had noticed that Yi-Yun's meridians looked strong before he had attempted with the pill. He never expected that the medicinal essence of the pill had been completely absorbed by Yi-Yun in a few seconds. It was like pouring a container of water into the lake. There was not much of a change. What happened? The gray-robed elder was unsure. And at that moment, the unconscious Yi-Yun was also feeling shocked from the transformations his body was undergoing after the pill entered his body. He had clearly sensed that the essence in the pill had been absorbed by the divine tree seed. And after it absorbed the pill's essence, it seemed to grow a tiny bit. As it was such a minute amount, it would not have been discovered if not for Yi-Yun's extremely powerful perception. The divine tree seed could absorb the essence of the pill. Yi-Yun was not surprised regarding this. Back at the herbal garden in the stone house, there had been a large number of herbal treasures planted. And these herbs were eventually used to grow and nourish the divine tree seed. Now, with the divine tree seed sprouting, it was not a surprise that it could absorb the essence of spiritual medicine. Upon realizing this, a thought flashed across Yi-Yun's head. He seemed to understand why he was left immobile. After the divine tree seed entered his dantian, the sapling needed large amounts of the worldly essence in its nascent stage. However, without providing it with spiritual herbs and medicine, it could only absorb heaven-earth essence. And the heaven-earth essence was gathered toward Yi-Yun's dantian through his meridians as the passageways. Although Yi-Yun had benefited from this process, with his meridians being tempered and becoming larger and stronger, the price he had paid was the seizure of all his meridians by the divine tree seed. It left him completely immobile as a result. In order to gain control over his meridians again, he probably needed to wait till the divine tree seed grew to a certain stage. He believed that it was unlikely that the divine tree seed would grow into a massive, towering divine tree in one shot. It might temporarily stop after a certain period of time. With this thought in mind, Yi-Yun smiled bitterly inwardly. Although the divine tree seed was in his body, it was not under his control. Chapter 1054, Waking Up. Translator, Sitalan Editor. Yi-Yun, who was being treated by the gray-robed elder, had garnered the old man's interest. He was an ill person that the old man had never encountered before. The old man took out a box of silver needles, planning on giving Yi-Yun acupuncture, but what rendered him speechless was that the inability of the needles to prick Yi-Yun's acupuncture points. The gray-robed elder infused his yuan qi into the silver needles in the hopes of breaking through Yi-Yun's skin, but he only ended up snapping them. Why couldn't the needles lodge in his flesh? The old man stared with widened eyes, for he had never encountered such a situation before. There was a dumbfounded silence. Could this young man have metallic flesh and bone? The old man muttered to himself before tearing and removing the tattered clothes in front of Yi-Yun's chest. What happened rendered Yi-Yun speechless. The old man was treating him as a guinea pig. He was not worried about his danger, but by removing his tattered clothes, the old man could see a dark gold piece of thin paper adhered to Yi-Yun's chest. What was this? The elder was somewhat befuddled. The dark gold paper was obviously the 10,000 Fey divine canon that Felicitous Rain Lord had given Yi-Yun. However, the remnant page of the 10,000 Fey divine canon was something that even supremacies might not recognize, not to mention the gray-robed elder. Furthermore, who could imagine that a young man that had fainted in the desert would have such a rare artifact? The thin piece of paper was only thought as a protective charm by the elder. Just as he wanted to peel it off, he realized that the piece of paper was stuck to Yi-Yun's flesh, preventing him from tearing it away. Just as the elder was feeling puzzled, the maidservant rushed in and said, "Miss requests Mr. Changsun to move this young man to the sandboat. She has something to tend to." Old man Changsun faltered for a moment. He had originally believed that the mistress had suddenly saved the young man from a sudden bout of kindness. But now, the mistress was sending the punk to the sand boat? That sand boat was privately owned by the mistress. Other than close relatives or friends of the mistress, no one had the chance of boarding the sand boat. Was there something special about the punk that the mistress had eyed? Although the elder enjoyed a level of status in the Divine Secrets Trading Company, he was an outsider after all. He could not make any of those inquiries. He got a set of clothes to dress Yi-Yun and brought him to the sand boat together with the maidservant. The sand boat that was cruising through the desert was exquisite in its internal decorations. However, its artistic style was mainly pink, making it obvious that it was a female's residence. In the biggest hall inside the sand boat, Yi-Yun finally saw the mistress of the Divine Secrets Trading Company. She was dressed in a light yellow dress and she walked in a feather-footed manner like a willow in the wind. She did not look a year past 18 and her skin was fair and delicate. However, what astonished Yi-Yun was that the girl had a thin, light red scar across her face that stretched from her forehead. It reached down to her nose bridge in a winding manner like a snake, into the girl's veil. From the looks of it, the young mistress of the Divine Secrets Trading Company was wearing the veil not because it was a deliberate act of mysticism but to hide the scar. However, Yi-Yun was puzzled. In the world of warriors, there was no lack of pills that could restore one's looks. Why would the young mistress of the Divine Secrets Trading Company not remove the scar? "Mr. Chang-sun, can you save this person?" The young mistress's voice was soft and gentle and it sounded soothing to the ears. "About that." Old man Chang-sun revealed a look of passiveness as he immediately reported the strange process of his treatment of Yi-Yun to the mistress. "Oh. He can't be pricked by needles, but he is able to rapidly absorb the medicinal essence in a pill?" "Yes, the nutritive restoration pill I refined has strong medicinal properties, but he had taken a few seconds to finish absorbing it. Furthermore, I sensed that the vitality in his body grew slightly stronger after he finished absorbing it." "Then, does Mr. Chang-sun believe that better pills can save this young man?" "About that." Old man Chang-sun shook his head. "I can't be sure. It's just a guess." "All right." Upon hearing old man Chang-sun's words, the yellow-dressed girl seemed to ponder for quite a while before she took out a jade box. She opened it and took out a green pill. Old man Chang-sun was stupefied when he saw it. "The Southern Dipper green glass pill? Miss, don't tell me that you are planning on feeding this pill to him?" The value of the Southern Dipper green glass pill was something that could not be disregarded even with the Divine Secrets Trading Company's wealth. If a direct descendant of the Divine Secrets Trading Company was severely injured, it was no surprise that the Southern Dipper green glass pill would be used for treatment. However, the youth was just a stranger, yet she was planning on using such a valuable pill? The yellow-dressed girl held the Southern Dipper green glass pill in hand and after puckering her lips, she fed it to Yi-Yun. Similarly, the Southern Dipper green glass pill melted the moment it entered Yi-Yun's mouth, with all the energy contained in it absorbed by the Divine Tree Seed. This time, Yi-Yun clearly perceived that the Divine Tree Seed had grown a tiny bit. The young sapling that had sprouted turned even greener. This surprised Yi-Yun. The pill that the Divine Secrets Trading Company had given him was indeed of excellent quality. However, Yi-Yun did not know that in the nearby Sun Burial Sandsea, the Divine Secrets Trading Company actually had a mine that produced such treasures. Therefore, the spiritual medicine that was produced here was not bad. Unfortunately, Yi-Yun still had most of his meridians controlled by the Divine Tree Seed despite having absorbed a Southern Dipper green glass pill. He could not even move one bit. Upon seeing this scene, the yellow-dressed girl wrinkled her eyebrows slightly as if she was in a dilemma. At that moment, without old man Chang-sun telling her, she could already sense the energetic changes in Yi-Yun's body. His vitality was gradually strengthening. Absorbing the spiritual medicine was indeed helpful at healing Yi-Yun, but the problem was that a single Southern Dipper green glass pill was insufficient. How much more spiritual medicine was needed? This left the yellow-dressed girl in a dilemma. She was afraid that Yi-Yun could not be saved even if she used more spiritual medicine. After thinking for a while, the yellow-dressed girl finally gritted her teeth and took out a golden pill. Upon seeing the pill, old man Chang Suan's mouth twitched. "Miss, this is the young opening mystic pill. Surely you aren't feeding the pill to this young man? Wouldn't it be such a waste? If the old chairman were to know." Old man Chang Sun did not continue his exhortation, for he was at a loss. There was a limit to acts of kindness. To use a Southern Dipper green glass pill and a young opening mystic pill to save a stranger would be too profligating. If the old chairman were to know of the matter, he would be incensed. Could it be that the young man was the mistress's secret lover? If they had known each other in the past, old man Chang Sun would have found it understandable. But there was no time for him to ponder over the matter carefully. When the young opening mystic pill was placed in Yi-Yun's mouth, the pure yang medicinal essence inside the pill burst out immediately. The yang god emperor in heaven was inclined to pure yang. And in it, the Sun Burial Sand Sea was one of the best pure yang lands. The pure yang elemental herbal treasures produced in Sun Burial Sand Sea were all priceless treasures. As for the young opening mystic pill, it was refined using such pure yang materials and it matched Yi-Yun perfectly. The yang opening mystic pill's medicinal essence melted into Yi-Yun's dantian and made him feel like a gigantic furnace had risen in it. Most of it was absorbed by the divine tree seed, but there was still a tiny portion that was used by Yi-Yun. At that moment, the 9-leaf pure yang Dao fruit in Yi-Yun's dantian radiated with a dazzling beam. Every ounce of pure yang energy that was absorbed by Yi-Yun was absorbed into the 9-leaf Dao fruit, and when the energy gathered to an extreme, Yi-Yun sent a blast outwards with a thought. The pure yang power exploded out and surged through every meridian of his. After his originally rigid meridians surged with pure yang power, it was like spring water flowing into a dried-up river bed that finally revived it. Yi-Yun took a deep breath as he moved his nearly ossified limbs before he opened his eyes. After finally gaining control of his body, Yi-Yun heaved a sigh of relief. Half a month of immobility was indeed uncomfortable. However, Yi-Yun was puzzled. Why would the yellow-dressed girl spare no cost in saving a stranger like him? If she were said to be kind, wasn't such kindness excessive? Chapter 1055, Ji Shuiyan. Translator, Sitalan Editor. Finally, he has awakened. The girl in yellow heaved a heavy sigh of relief when she saw Yi-Yun wake up. She would have been at a great loss if she spent 2 of her precious pills only for Yi-Yun to remain unconscious. Still somewhat out of it, Yi-Yun was confused as to why this girl in yellow saved him. He cupped his fists and said, "Lady, thank you for saving me." Upon hearing Yi-Yun's words, old man Chang Sun nearly blew his top. This punk did not even recognize the great mistress. After all, if he did know her, why would he greet her in such a way? They had saved a complete stranger at a great cost, all for a word of thanks. What point was there in that? The old man Chang Sun looked at Yi-Yun as though he would devour the ungrateful whelp. Which darn guard had saved Yi-Yun? Yi-Yun didn't notice old man Chang Suan's glaring. His gaze was fixed on the girl in yellow as he waited for her to say something. "Xiaoye, accompany Mr. Chang Sun in obtaining some Bodhi grass and brewing some herbal soup." The girl in yellow turned to instruct the maidservant standing beside her. Old man Chang Sun faltered for a moment before he realized that the girl in yellow had something to say to the punk. Despite feeling somewhat vexed, he had no choice but to leave the sand boat with the maidservant. After the duo left, the girl in yellow stood up and gave Yi-Yun a bow. "Senior, I'm Ji Shuiyan." "Senior?" Yi-Yun was momentarily surprised. Such a method of address. For all of his years of living, this was the first time he was called senior. The girl in yellow looked about 18, but her actual age was likely to be near his own. Yi-Yun said, "I'm Yi-Yun, not some senior. I have cultivated for less than a century and there is a limit to the gap in our ages." Less than a century? Ji Shuiyan looked at Yi Yun in surprise, but she immediately chuckled and said softly, "Senior, I do not have any ill intentions. My eyes are different from others. They can see through the cultivation levels of many people, but I'm unable to discern Senior's cultivation level. I can only sense that there is an immense power within Senior's body that renders my eyes completely ineffective. For such a thing to happen, it can only mean that Senior's cultivation level far exceeds my imagination. Furthermore, Senior fainted in the desert, yet a large amount of grass had sprouted around Senior's body. Such a phenomenon isn't something ordinary people are capable of." In addition, Mr. Changsuan's treatment of Senior was filled with several oddities. No matter how precious the medicine was, it would be absorbed clean by Senior's body. Even metal and stone couldn't prick Senior's skin. How can Senior have only cultivated for less than 100 years? Hearing Ji Shuiyan's reasons, Yi Yun felt somewhat enlightened. To her, he was a mighty figure that had met with misfortune. Sparing 2 precious pills to save a mighty figure was naturally beneficial. To have such a figure in one's debt was an extremely rare circumstance. Yi Yun waved his hands and said, "I'm really no senior. I have cultivated for less than 100 years and my cultivation level is only a realm higher than yours." He had discerned that the girl's cultivation level was at the beginning stages of the Heaven Ascension realm. For her age, that was impressive. Just 1 full realm higher than me? Ji Shuiyan found it unbelievable, but Yi Yun did not seem like he was lying. It appeared that she had made a mistake. Upon realizing this, Ji Shuiyan shook her head. This was a classic case of her trying anything when in a desperate situation. At that moment, Yi Yun said, "Miss Ji, might you have saved me because you face difficulties that require the help of an expert?" Upon hearing his query, Ji Shuiyan sighed lightly and barely managed to force a laugh. "Not really. I am dedicated to martial arts but have reached a plateau in my cultivation. I was hoping to be an apprentice of a senior." Ji Shuiyan said this nonchalantly, but Yi Yun sensed that she was hiding something. However, he did not probe further since she clearly didn't wish to elaborate. Instead, he said, "Miss Ji, I know that the medicine you gave me was extremely valuable. I wonder where Miss Ji's house is. If there is a chance, I will definitely return the favor." The kindness he had received was no trifling matter. Yi Yun's life might not have been at risk if he stayed immobile, but nourishing the divine tree seed sprout to a certain stage would take him a year or 2. He didn't want to spend years lying in the desert, not to mention the waste of valuable cultivation time. There's no need. A chance acquaintance is fated after all. For me to help you once, it can be considered fate. There is no need for you to return the favor. Ji Shuiyan seemed to quickly bounce back from her disappointment. She smiled at Yi Yun but made it a point to not mention her residence. She didn't seem to be interested in him returning the favor. This could be expected. Why would the Divine Secrets Trading Company need the favor of a junior at the Dao Manifestation realm? All right. Since Ji Shuiyan refused to speak of her troubles, Yi Yun respected her wishes. He had a good impression of her. Although she had her motives saving him, they weren't underhanded. And when she later discovered that he was not the expert she believed him to be, she had not stooped to mockery or angry demands of repayment. Yi Yun, since you are at the Dao Manifestation realm, it should be rather easy for you to traverse the Sun Burial Sand Sea. It's best you leave as soon as possible. There has been some phenomenon recently in the Sun Burial Sand Sea with many factions gathered here. There is much unrest. At your cultivation level, it's best you stay away from it. Ji Shuiyan gave Yi Yun some advice. Yi Yun's heart stirred when he heard it. Phenomenon? What phenomenon? It's best you not know. That you have cultivated for less than a century, yet have obtained such a level shows your impressive talent. I'm very envious of it. Ji Shuiyan had no intention to speak further. Clearly, she was afraid that any elaboration would only harm him. All right then. Yi Yun nodded. With the conversation reaching that point, it was meaningless to pursue the matter further. He could only bid farewell and leave the sandboat. From the short conversation with Ji Shuiyan, Yi Yun had a nagging feeling that Ji Shuiyan had hidden many things in her heart despite her kind temperament. He memorized the merchant logo on the sandboat, hoping to find the company in the future and repay the favor. But at that moment, Yi Yun's heart skipped a beat as his footsteps slowed down. He had suddenly sensed an ice-cold perception enshrouding him. Yi Yun frowned as his perception did not yield. Instead, he advanced in the direction of the sinister perception. Yi Yun's perception was keen to begin with. But after absorbing the divine tree seed, it had grown even stronger. He could even penetrate chaos stones, so Yi Yun instantly sensed that the other party's cultivation level was stronger than his. However, he was not afraid of letting the other discover it. He wantonly used his own perception. In just an instant, Yi Yun saw an old woman in red with a head full of white hair. She was partially slumped in a loft in the sandboat. She was skinny and scrawny. Her eyes were deeply recessed in, but her face was as white as a ghost's. She suddenly widened her eyes and gave a stunning smile. Baring her yellow teeth, she said, "Yener, come over." Ji Shuiyan, who had just sent Yi Yun off, shuddered when she heard that voice. Her face instantly drained of color as Yi Yun noticed that a deep panic flashed in her eyes. Chapter 1056, Old Woman in Red. Translator, Sitalan Editor. This old woman. Yi Yun used his perception to observe the old woman in red. He could keenly sense a lingering ghostly aura around her. On top of that, the old granny just looked extremely horrifying, like a corpse that had crawled out of the grave. He looked back at Ji Shuiyan, who carefully walked to the door of the old woman's loft room after hearing the granny's voice transmission. After several attempts to muster her courage, she opened the door. Immediately, a cadaveric gas effused from the door as though an ancient tomb had been opened. Ji Shuiyan's lips were pale as she looked at the old woman's ghastly white face. However, she made herself stand firm and bowed before her elder. "Greetings, Granny." "Ha! Ha!" A harsh laughter emitted from the granny's throat. Every laugh was followed by a pause that made one shudder. "Greetings, Granny? So, you still know about greeting me? Do you think that I know nothing of what you have been doing these past few days while I have been isolated in recuperation? You spared no expense to save a person in the desert. Tell me, why did you save him?" Upon hearing the old woman's words, what little color remained in Ji Shuiyan's face drained once again. However, she forcefully composed herself, saying, "An acquaintance is also considered fate." The granny laughed. "Yener only saved him because of fate, ah." Ji Shuiyan suddenly screamed as the old woman suddenly reached out her scrawny palm that resembled a chicken's claw, slapping Ji Shuiyan in the face. "Pa!" With a crisp sound, Ji Shuiyan slammed into the door. Her veil had been torn, leaving behind 3 bleeding scratch wounds on her face courtesy of the old woman's fingernails. Almost instantly, the wounds turned black, and the blood that flowed out seemed to rot. Pain and excruciating pain. There was cadaveric poison in the old woman's fingernails. The pain inflicted upon entry into the body was agonizing. However, Ji Shuiyan held her face and tolerated the pain without even uttering a sound. Upon seeing this, Yi Yun finally understood the reason behind Ji Shuiyan's scars. It was no wonder she wore a veil to hide her scars. It was also the reason why she did not treat the scars despite being a mistress of a powerful trading company. If the scars were remnants of a cadaveric poison, they would be extraordinarily difficult to treat. Secondly, even if Ji Shuiyan did heal them, the granny could just inflict more. Such a cycle would leave Ji Shuiyan in despair, making her abandon any hope of seeking treatment. To not utter a sound despite the pain. "You sure have some mettle. I know what goes on in the head of a little broad like you. You thought the kid as some senior with extremely high cultivation levels. You hoped that with him owing you a favor, you could request him to finish me for you, isn't that so? The granny continued, what the kid cultivates in happens to be an orthodox power filled with vitality. When you saw the grasses growing in the desert around him, you must have thought of using his power of vitality to gain an advantage over my ghostly cultivation? What a pity! Your plans might be shrewd, but he was really just a junior. You despaired when you realized your mistake and were afraid that I would seek revenge, so you quickly urged him to leave the convoy? In a few simple words, the granny exposed Ji Shuyan's schemes. There was more and more black blood flowing down Ji Shuyan's face. However, she did not bother wiping it off. She only held her face and gritted her teeth, remaining silent. Against this granny that neither seemed human nor ghost, Ji Shuyan could not put up any resistance. Taking advantage of the fact that the granny was in isolation, Ji Shuyan had saved Yi Yun. Unfortunately, things did not go as she wished and everything was noticed by the old woman in red. With her plans defeated and exposed, a feeling of despair rose up in her heart. Her death did not matter, but was the Divine Secrets trading company her grandfather bequeathed her going to decline because of her ineptitude? This is your final warning, Yennefer, obey me, do a good job finding herbs for me, and I will not treat you badly. But if you try any of these tiny schemes ever again, I will not hesitate to destroy that beautiful face of yours. It might even lose all its essences, turning into a face like mine. The old woman's tone suddenly softened. She gently caressed Ji Shuyan's face. But despite her seeming softness, her fingernails deliberately brushed Ji Shuyan's wounds. It was a heart-wrenching pain for Ji Shuyan as her face turned paler and her lips quivered. However, all she could do was bear with it. Ha ha, what a beautiful face. Unfortunately, I cannot let your little scheme go without a cost. That person you saved displeases me. I have a heart-dismembering worm here that is more than sufficient to deal with a junior. Kill him. As she spoke, she flipped her scrawny palm and a tiny worm appeared in the middle of her hand. Upon seeing the worm, Ji Shuyan shuddered as her chest tightened. She knew that the punishment was really meant for her. She was a kind person, so to kill someone she had saved would absolutely devastate her psyche. Granny, let that youth off. He is innocent. Furthermore, I have already bidden him farewell. He should be far away from here. Ji Shuyan hoped that Yi Yun would go as far as possible. However, the next sentence the old woman said made Ji Shuyan's body freeze. Gone? Unfortunately, he hasn't left. How can he bear leaving after being saved by such a beautiful girl? He is following the sand boat on an azure linhorse. He didn't leave? Ji Shuyan felt her entire body lose its strength. Why didn't Yi Yun leave after she told him to do so? He was certainly doomed, for she understood the old woman's character. In order to rear Ain Ghul, she would wipe out an entire city without batting an eye. Why would she hesitate for even a second at killing one young man? Yi Yun clearly saw everything that happened in the sand boat. He never expected that the sand boat so lavishly adorned with the sentiments of a young girl would harbor such an old monster. Heart-dismembering worm? Yi Yun was not worried about such a worm at all. Although he was indeed at the Dao Manifestation Realm and he had been cultivating for less than 100 years, his strength was beyond imagination among warriors at the Dao Manifestation Realm. It was even beyond his own imagination. Yi Yun did not know how strong he had become after condensing 4 9-leaf Dao fruits, with one of them being a major destruction Dao fruit. Furthermore, there was a divine tree seed in his dantian. Now, he could test himself. Although the granny's cultivation level was high, Yi Yun could identify it clearly after fusing with the divine tree seed. She was at the 4-story Dao Palace realm, a full realm plus a little more than him. This old monster would be a good litmus test for his newfound power. However, the divine tree seed in Yi Yun's body still had control over a portion of his meridians. Yi Yun had a feeling that as the divine tree seed slowly sprouted, the heaven-earth yuan qi that it needed would increase. If he did not provide it with sufficient essence, he might find himself like in the desert. The divine tree seed would take over his body again, and he'd be immobilized. Chapter 1057, Heart Dismembering Worm. Translator, Sitalan Editor. When he considered the possibility that he might not have the energy to rear the divine tree seed, Ian felt perturbed. The divine tree seed was the reincarnation of a god spirit. How much heaven-earth yuan qi was needed to rear a god spirit? Even the mere thought of it rendered Ian speechless. It was not a joke to leave it starving. What if it rendered him immobile during a battle? How shameful would it be to be killed like that? He became unsure if swallowing of the divine tree seed was a blessing or a curse. But now that the divine tree seed fused with his dantian, it was too late for regret. Not that Yun had any. Had he not taken the divine tree seed into him, he would have died several times in the door to the 33 skies. His adventures would have ended long ago. The rearing of the divine tree seed was a challenge, but also a great opportunity. Ian foresaw that as long as the divine tree seed matured, his strength would continue to increase exponentially. A portion of my meridians are still being used by the divine tree seed, so I can't use all my strength. I need to clear those meridians first. Although the 2 pills that Ji Shuiyan had given Yun were valuable, they were unable to fully restore him to his peak state. Fortunately, Yun happened to have many spiritual herbs in his interspatial ring. They couldn't be used before, because he was immobile and couldn't take them out. Now, having regained control of his body, he withdrew all the pills and relics in his interspatial ring. Yun had accumulated quite a number of relics and pills over the past few years. Now, he rapidly fed them to the divine tree seed as though they cost nothing. The divine tree seed drained all the yuan qi and, at a visible rate, the relics and pills vanished. Meanwhile, the energy within Yun's dantian was blossoming. Even though he had a deep and solid foundation, it was not sufficient to withstand the raging energy. However, with the divine tree seed present, all the yuan qi turned into a vortex before being sucked and stored within the seed. The divine tree seed sapling finally grew leaves. Yun could feel the immense power of vitality from the divine tree seed. It flowed into his meridians, filling his body with energy. Moreover, Yun's meridians had previously been thickened. So he had no problem withstanding the yuan qi. There was one side effect that did surprise Yun: his cultivation level began to rapidly increase. Oh? That's actually possible? Yun was at the early stages of the Tao manifestation realm. Typically, he'd need to spend a good deal of time solidifying his cultivation level. But now, Yun only needed 5 minutes to solidify the early stages of his Tao manifestation. He was even beginning to progress to the middle stages of the Tao manifestation realm. Yun had 4 9-leaf Tao fruits, so his nomological insights were already extremely deep. There was no fear of his foundation being unstable. His cultivation level shot straight to the peak of the early stages of the Tao manifestation realm, leaving him just short of the middle stages of the Tao manifestation realm. Additionally, the energy that the divine tree seed had regurgitated was extremely pure. There was no possibility of any negative after effects. Any warrior knew that they could use pills to create a sharp increase in their cultivation. But after the increase, the impure energy contained within such pills would need to be carefully refined. Trying to raise cultivation in that manner would waste a lot of time in the end. But for Yun, that problem didn't exist. The divine tree seed was like an energy purifier. It absorbed about 70 to 80% of the pill's energy, but regurgitated about 20 to 30%. However, this 20 to 30% was extremely pure. It was nothing short of incredible. Yun was pleasantly surprised by this discovery. Although the amount of energy he could absorb was small, the quality was much better. Due to this, it was worth it to feed more than 90% energy to the divine tree seed. If the divine tree seed were to truly mature, it would likely give him other amazing opportunities. I have 4 9-leaf Tao fruits and a divine tree seed. If I were to obtain some treasured herbs, wouldn't my cultivation speed improve by leaps and bounds? Just as this thought flashed across Ian's mind, he suddenly frowned. Through his perception, he saw something in the sand boat that made murderous intent rise up in his heart. The granny in red clothes held Ji Shuyan up by her arms with ghastly claws that were concealed by a mist. Ji Shuyan's face was covered in bloody wounds and her expression was ashen. You dare defy me? Do you know the price? The granny's sinister-sounding voice echoed. Kill me. I've had enough. Ji Shuyan bit through her lips and her white teeth was stained with fresh blood. She had fallen into a nightmare the moment the old witch had appeared. She did not know if the nightmare would ever end, all she knew was that she could no longer endure it. Deep in her heart, she knew there would come a day when the old witch would torture her to death. The only reason she was even still alive was because the old witch hoped Ji Shuyan would find medicine for her. After living in such a desperate situation, Ji Shuyan had often thought of dying. You want to die? Ha! Ha! Do you think that it would be so simple, dying? The old woman stood up and walked toward Ji Shuyan. Suddenly, she grabbed at Ji Shuyan's top and tore it away. Shi-la! The striking sound of silk tearing was heard as Ji Shuyan's top as well as her pink-colored undergarment, a dudu, were torn off, exposing her naked body. Ji Shuyan exclaimed as she tried struggling, but she was unable to escape the two ghastly claws that held her arms. He, what tenderness! The granny in red licked her lips. Ji Shuyan's skin was delicate but it only garnered the old woman's loathing. You dare defy me for a toad you picked off the ground? Do you really think so little of the resources I possess? The granny gentle beckoned with her hand and the heart-dismembering worm she had given Ji Shuyan flew out automatically into her hand. Holding the heart-dismembering worm in hand, she admired it in fascination. Baby, you must be hungry. Soon, you'll be able to eat your fill. As she spoke, the granny placed the heart-dismembering worm on Ji Shuyan's abdomen. G. The heart-dismembering worm issued a sharp screeching sound. It seemed eager to bore a hole as it began to squirm toward Ji Shuyan's navel. Ji Shuyan's expression changed drastically. Although she was a tenacious person by nature, allowing her to endure what ordinary people couldn't, she was still a young girl. Upon seeing such a disgusting worm about to bore into her navel, how could she not be frightened? What full and ample breasts! Who do you plan on seducing with that pair of bunnies? Why don't you feed them to the heart-dismembering worm? Let it eat that pair of bunnies of yours and see which man will still like you. The evil granny's extremely vicious words made Ji Shuyan break out into a cold sweat that covered her forehead. She was acutely aware of the old witch's craziness. She knew that she had every intention of acting on her threats. Ji Shuyan was not afraid of death, but the witch planned to make her live in a state worse than death. She felt an excruciating pain as the black heart-dismembering worm tore into her navel. In seconds, it would bore into her stomach. Just as despair was about to overwhelm her, she suddenly felt a coldness by her abdomen. Phew! An ice-cold frost beam flashed past as the heart-dismembering worm let out a sharp cry before flying off. Ding! With the sharp clink of metal colliding, the heart-dismembering worm was pinned onto a wall by a flying saber. The flying saber had embedded itself in the wall with the handle still vibrating. Ji Shuyan was momentarily surprised. Who was it? Chapter 1058, Yun's Strength. Translator, Sitalan Editor. Shie. With a light sound, the flying saber suddenly burned in pure young flames. The heart-dismembering worm let out a shrill cry as it quickly burned to a crisp. Upon seeing this scene, the granny in red's expression immediately darkened. Who's there? She turned her head abruptly, her gaze piercing the room's door. The Aguilawood door that was engraved with an array of mystical symbols had been penetrated by the flying saber, with only a tiny hole left behind. Somehow, the person who had launched the flying saber couldn't see inside the room, yet was still able to shoot the saber through the door with perfect accuracy. Not only that, but the swift and true saber was imbued with the power of pure yang. It had killed the heart-dismembering worm in one strike. To accomplish such a feat, a person had to have extraordinary perception. Who had such impressive ability? Creak. At that moment, the door was pushed open. There, in a Divine Secrets trading company outfit, stood Yi Yun. His clothes from before had been torn apart. "It's you." The granny's pupils constricted as a look of disbelief appeared on her face. She never expected that the person who had done of all that was Yi Yun. "It looks like I have underestimated you, or perhaps you've been hiding your true strength." The granny slowly advanced towards Yi Yun. She resembled an old night owl in the shadows, spooking people with its gaze. Yi Yun beckoned, and, as though it had a mind of its own, the thousand snow-flying saber that was stuck in the wall flew into his hand. As he twirled the thousand snow-flying saber, he said nonchalantly, "There is no need for me to hide my strength against you. You just failed to see it." "All right." The granny's eyes were filled with killing intent, and at that moment, Ji Shuiyan suddenly sent a voice transmission to Yi Yun. "Yi Yun, she's a 4-story Dao Palace. She rears the inspector as a trump card." Although it was a Yuan Qi voice transmission, the old woman had some power at work on Ji Shuiyan. This, added to her powerful perception, allowed her to hear the girl's message clearly. "Slut, you are courting death." The old woman's eyes flashed with a cold beam, and the two demonic claws that held Ji Shuiyan pulled in opposite directions. At Ji Shuiyan's cultivation level, there was no doubt that the claws would tear her apart. Reacting quickly, Yi Yun flicked his fingers. Shoo! Shoo! Two flying sabers flew out like lightning and pierced through the demonic claws. Shie! Shie! The demonic claws were reduced to nothingness by the pure yang flames. But the old woman took advantage of the chance to pounce at Yi Yun. She had anticipated that he'd saved Ji Shuiyan, and Yi Yun realized that her true target was him all along. "Die, foolish kid." The old woman swiped a claw at Yi Yun's head. It was a strike that could even tear apart divine metal. Yi Yun was not flustered by the sudden sneak attack. He retreated quickly and simultaneously took out a broken sword. The seemingly ordinary sword slashed at the old woman's wrists. "Humph." She snorted coldly as her claws burned with billows of black smoke. From within the smoke emerged the large rotting mouth of a devil. The demon bared its fangs and lunged straight at Yi Yun's broken sword. Even an excellent sword would immediately rot from the cadaveric gases the ghoul spewed. As for the old woman, she continued to slash at Yi Yun's head with her ghastly claws. Yi Yun was only a Dao manifestation realm warrior. Even if he did possess hidden strength, how could he compare to the powers of a 4-story Dao palace warrior? Ka-cha! The ghoul bit at Yi Yun's broken sword. The old hag was delighted, knowing that any enchanted item bitten by her ghoul would lose a great deal of its spirituality. So how could a feeble enchanted item like this broken sword possibly withstand her attack? However, before her sinister smile could show, her face froze. Just after the ghoul bit on the broken sword, it immediately let out a blood-curdling cry. It then struggled to release the broken sword. But at that moment, the broken sword emitted a radiant golden beam that resembled the burning sun's core. It enveloped the ghoul within its brilliant luster. The ghoul cried out as it turned to ash, while the broken sword suddenly slashed through a short distance of space, appearing immediately in front of the old woman. 3-foot passage sword, sword of time. Yi Yun's sword thrust straight at the old woman. The old woman's eyes widened, her expression suddenly turning ashen. This kid. He had managed to cultivate a pure Yang Great Dao, and his sword could bend the laws of time? The old woman's expression changed slightly. However, her desire to kill Yi Yun only grew. So what if you cultivate some Great Dao? Do you think that bit of strength will be enough to defeat me? The old woman let out a sinister cry, opening her dried and cracking mouth wide. A blob of black gas spewed forth. Immediately accompanying it were shrieking and howling screams. The black gas manifested as a gigantic phantom. With a sharp cry, it clashed with Yun's sword. Oh! Yun realized that his sword seemed to enter a quagmire as a powerful pull was constantly tugging down at his sword. Yun, that's her inspector. She has fed it with blood for over 10,000 years. It is not to be underestimated. Ji Shuiyan gave up using a voice transmission and instead shouted out loud. Slut, once I'm done with him, you will taste the pain of thousands of worms boring into your heart. The old woman viciously glanced at Ji Shuiyan, which made her slump to the ground. It was as though all her energy had been drained out of her as her body turned cold. She was under the control of the old woman and was unable to put up a fight. Therefore, she was naturally unable to aid Yun. She was tormented at the thought of Yun suffering at the hands of the old woman for saving her. If he were to be captured by her, endless torment would surely follow. Inspector. Yun sensed that the inspector was constantly consuming his yuan qi. At the same time, he could feel his meridians freezing up. The circulative flow of yuan qi also became increasingly retarded. With the inspector draining their energy, any warrior would quickly become defenseless. If all Yun's yuan qi was devoured by the inspector, the old woman would have free reign over him. It all depends if you have the ability to suck me dry of my yuan qi. Yun snorted to himself as his yuan qi burst out. A black wheel appeared in Yun's hand. Destruction Dao Domain 10,000 Demon Wheel of Existence. Hum hum hum. There was a multitude of demons and gods sealed in the 10,000 Demon Wheel of Existence, to begin with. These phantoms that represented destruction were on a completely different level from the inspector that the granny reared. In addition, the domination of major destruction laws over ghost Dao laws was in every aspect complete and thorough. Roar! The roars of the myriad demons and gods thundered as a gigantic black vortex was conjured in the void. Just as the inspector darted toward Yun, it was swept up by the redoubtable strength of destruction. The terrifyingly suppressive presence of demons and gods made it feel like it was a sparrow facing an eagle. There was no way for it to resist. Pang! The inspector was hauled into the vortex before being completely shredded apart. The inspector that had been nourished for 10,000 years already had its intelligence, resulting in it issuing a cry of despair and pain. As for the old woman, being the rearer meant her life essence was tightly linked to the inspector. The explosion of the inspector caused a serious backlash on her. It was as though a portion of her very soul had been erased. The impact was visible. You destroyed my intrinsic inspector. Ah! With a dull grunt, her old body flew backward as she suddenly spewed a mouthful of blood. Chapter 1059, Killing the Old Woman. Translator, Sitalan Editor. The old woman in red was a warrior well-versed in Ghost Dao. The intrinsic inspector was like a second soul to her. It was her main tool for murder because it could devour large amounts of blood essence. Furthermore, when it devoured the lifeblood of geniuses, it provided her a great amount of enrichment. In every other battle in which she brought out her intrinsic inspector, even ones where she couldn't kill her enemies, she could definitely inflict serious injury and allow her intrinsic inspector to escape unharmed. Even if she were to encounter old freaks a few sub-realms higher than her, the inspector would still be able to injure the opponent and escape. Even when it was fighting a superior opponent. Never had she encountered a situation in which her intrinsic inspector barely put up a fight before being consumed and destroyed. Even her body had been severely injured. This is a destruction law? You even know destruction, Great Dao? The old woman wiped the blood from her mouth. She was still infuriated from the destruction of her intrinsic inspector and could only manage to gradually calm down. Pure Yang Great Dao. Spacetime Great Dao. Destruction Great Dao. How could a person know so many great Tao? Furthermore, what was his cultivation level? How young was he? The old woman refused to believe that Yi Yun was only at the Tao manifestation realm. Fighting a 4-story Tao palace at the Tao manifestation realm was completely unheard of. Kid, you destroyed my intrinsic inspector. I'll make sure you die with me. The old woman suddenly let out a bizarre cry and charged at Yi Yun. Her flesh and blood bulged as an outburst of energy began to circulate in her body as though she would explode at any time. Self-destruction. Yi Yun was alarmed. Some warriors developed special cultivation techniques. When on the brink of death, they would explode, resulting in an internecine outcome with their enemies. The old woman was preparing such a technique. Yi Yun's heart shuddered and he prepared the appropriate countermeasures, but before he could act, the old woman suddenly changed trajectories and flew up like an arrow. Pang! The old woman burst right through the ceiling. The sand boat had 2 levels. In an instant, the old woman tore through both those levels and soared high into the sky. She escaped. Yi Yun's eyebrows pricked up. The self-destruction was only a ruse. She was taking advantage of the moment he gathered his energy in defense to escape. Without a thought, Yi Yun flew out of the sand boat. How could he let the old woman escape? If she did, there would be endless repercussions. So, Yi Yun charged out of the sand boat as well. The powerful impact of the 2 consecutively rushing out of the sand boat caused the top of the sand boat to explode. The surrounding members of the Divine Secrets Trading Company jumped in fright when they saw the sudden explosion of the sand boat. They held their breaths when they saw the 2 rocket into the sky. What just happened? Protect the mistress. Protect the mistress. Old man Changsun was in a panic. With the old chairman having vanished, the Divine Secrets Trading Company was doomed if anything untoward happened to the mistress. Kid, don't force me. The old woman was fleeing in desperation. As she gathered about of Yuan Qi and burned her lifeblood unsparingly, her speed rose rapidly. I have a mystic technique for escaping. It requires the burning of my blood essence. If you want to chase me, you would have to burn your blood essence as well. It would not be worth it for you. The old woman was sure that Yi Yun would not go to such ends. After all, they did not share a irreconcilable vendetta. Yi Yun would be going too far if he burned his blood essence to kill her. Seeing the old woman rapidly creating a gap, Yi Yun sneered. The space beneath his feet suddenly began to distort as the flow of time around him seemed to speed up. Time flies like an arrow, heavily down like a bow. Yi Yun took a step forward as the space beneath his foot contracted. It wasn't him catching up to the old woman but the space and time between him and her shrinking. It was as though the old woman was being pulled back by space itself. Such a method was something Yi Yun couldn't employ before he condensed his 9-leaf space-time Tao fruit. But now, it was a cinch. Ah! The old woman cried out in despair as she gathered her energy once again in the hopes of producing another charging spurt. But Yi Yun was now prepared, so how could he give her another chance? His pure yang broken sword flew straight out. To the ends of time, a sword for eternity. Phew! The sword beam flashed through heaven and earth. Space and time instantly lost all meaning as the sword of time tore through space and plunged into the old woman's dantian. Her body quaked violently as a mouthful of blood spewed out. As she looked at the wound in her abdomen, her face was filled with pain and despair. I should have killed that slut. The old woman said the last words of her life. At that instant, her destroyed dantian could no longer restrain the energy that had been compressed to an extreme. Boom! Energy erupted as the old woman's body exploded into smithereens. However, the extent of the explosion was much weaker than her self-destruction power. Yi Yun easily blocked the explosion by conjuring his Yuan Qi barrier. He naturally retreated under the energy blast and finally flew back into the sand boat. From the moment Yun rushed out to slay the old woman, he had begun using the laws of time, so it only appeared like 10 seconds to everyone else. They only saw two people fly out at an inconceivable speed, one after another, before a blinding Yuan Qi explosion lit up the sky. The force of the explosion might not have been terrifying, but the Yuan Qi that was released left everyone shuddering. There were many knowledgeable people, including Old Man Chang Sun, who could understand what the aura represented. Dao Palace Realm Warrior? The person who was hunted down and killed was a Dao Palace Realm Warrior? And not just in the early stages of Dao Palace, but with a certain level of accomplishment. Yet this Dao Palace level warrior was destroyed so effortlessly? Old Man Chang Sun tried to process this, but was left stupefied. Meanwhile, something else occurred that left him more dumbfounded. As Yun came back to the sand boat, he had not used his spacetime laws. So the Old Man Chang Sun, with his well-honed eyes, could recognize Yun. That's impossible. It's him? The youth that the mistress had saved without much thought in the desert had killed a Dao Palace Realm Warrior? Furthermore, where did the Dao Palace Realm Warrior come from? Their expedition did not have any Dao Palace Realm Warrior accompanying them. Was it an assassin? Upon having that thought, Old Man Chang Sun broke out into cold sweat. If they were targeted by an assassin at the Dao Palace realm, the outcome was obvious. As for Yun, Old Man Chang Sun initially felt that it was an utter waste of heavenly treasures when the mistress used valuable spiritual herbs to heal him. But it became apparent that this youth was a figure strong enough to easily kill a Dao Palace realm warrior. What was his background? And what was his cultivation level? Old Man Chang Sun became anxious that his earlier animosity had been detected by Yun. At his level, the young man could easily wipe him out. The mistress did save him after all. He wouldn't do anything untoward to her, right? With that thought in mind, Old Man Chang Sun hurriedly converged his aura as he rushed to the sand boat. The other armed escorts of the Divine Secrets Trading Company also rushed onto the sand boat. They all approached cautiously, afraid they might anger a god of death. Don't come in first. I'm fine. At that moment, Ji Shuyan's voice was heard, forcing everyone to stop in their spots. Instantly, Yun had appeared in front of Ji Shuyan. Looking at her, he casually asked, "Can you tell me about the situation with that old woman?" Chapter 1060, Slave Worms. Translator, Sitalan Editor. Instantly, Yun had appeared in front of Ji Shuyan. Looking at her, he casually asked, "Can you tell me about the situation with that old woman?" As he spoke those words, he noticed an unnatural paleness suffuse Ji Shuyan's face. Even her lips had lost any semblance of having blood in them. She tried to force a smile, but did not answer Yun's question. Instead, she said, "Thank you, Senior, for saving me." Ji Shuyan's words tapered off in an increasingly weak fashion. Her voice trembled slightly. Yun felt his heart shiver as he rushed to her side. He grabbed her wrist and immediately projected his perception into her body. There was still the fact that the top Ji Shuyan had been wearing was ripped apart by the old woman during the battle. When she was slumped to the ground she could somewhat cover herself, but when Yun helped her up she was immediately exposed. The pair of ample bunnies was too striking. Furthermore, the old woman had ripped off the bottom part of Ji Shuyan's top, so there was still remnant cloth barely covering the upper part of her fair bosom. It only served to accentuate her allure. But Yun was too busy to entertain nefarious thoughts. Once his perception entered Ji Shuyan's body, he discovered that there were already 3 poisonous worms buried within her body. They seemed to have been there for a long time. Worse, the 3 tiny poisonous worms had already reached 3 critical spots in her body: dantian, heart, and brain. These vermin were beginning to destroy her body, killing her by striking at her 3 critical spots. These are slave worms? Yun suddenly realized what was inside her body. He recalled the several years he spent in the God Advent Tower and how he read Azure Young Lord's large collection of books. They covered a wide range of topics, including various matters regarding the 12 empyrean heavens. Slave worms were one of them. These poisonous worms were planted in the bodies of slaves. Once their owner died, the slave worm would begin devouring the slave's body, consuming all of the slave's lifeblood. The entire purpose of the worms was to ensure that slaves would accompany their owner in death. It was extremely vicious. It also meant that back when Ji Shuiyin mistook him for a mighty senior, she had already expected this outcome by hoping to implore Yi Yun to finish the old woman for her. With her wrist held by Yi Yun, Ji Shuiyin was nearly leaning in Yi Yun's embrace. She pointed to her interspatial ring and said, in a staccato, "I left 2 letters, one for Mr. Chang's son. As for the other, senior, please hand it to my younger sister. Thank you, senior, for your help." Ji Shuiyin had clearly prepared her will. Yi Yun sighed inwardly. How much had this girl experienced? She had struggled to survive under the old woman's demonic claws, but she had already left behind a will. It was even possible that death was a form of relief for her. Don't speak any further. You'll only die faster speaking. With her wrist in hand, Yi Yun closed his eyes and focused, using his perception to track the 3 slave worms. Ji Shuiyin let out a light chuckle and said, "It's good to die fast too. It will reduce the pain. Slave worms are incurable, to begin with. I was already prepared for my inevitable death." Yi Yun knew that the pain from slave worms was an unbearable torment. Even mighty figures might not be able to endure such pain. It was made this way deliberately so that masters never had to fear their slaves' betrayal. It was also a preventative measure for the removal of the slave worms. The primary way to remove them, naturally, was for the person who planted them to take them out. Another method was to find a person proficient in the art of worms. The worms could be removed as long as the person was more skilled than the planter of the worm. However, even if the worms were removed, it might result in the victim's evisceration. At the very least, the victim would spend ages just recovering their lifeblood. Since the old woman who had planted the worms was dead and Yi Yun was not adept in the art of worms, Ji Shuiyin believed that Yi Yun could not save her even with his extraordinary strength. She was facing certain doom. Yi Yun took a deep breath as he closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was a mystical change to his irises. In his black iris, it looked like there was a galaxy rotating, with a mysterious wheel filled with mystic great Tao at its core. Ji Shuiyin believed that she was dying, and with the excruciating pain she was experiencing, she was numb to any stimulation from the external world. However, she was momentarily stupefied when she saw Yi Yun's eyes. What were those eyes of his? Ji Shuiyin was born with supernatural eyes, allowing her to notice Yi Yun's power. However, she felt that her so-called supernatural eyes were nothing compared to Yi Yun's. Anyone who had ever seen Ji Shuyin's supernatural eyes had praised them, declaring them to be as deep and unfathomable as the ocean. But Yi Yun's eyes seemed to contain the entire universe. Compared to the universe, an ocean was too tiny. Relax your mind and do not let your thoughts run wild. Yi Yun tore off a tattered piece of cloth on Ji Shuyin's body, revealing her perfect figure. Following that, Yi Yun placed one hand on her left chest and the other on her abdomen. With the sacred land by her chest suddenly pressed by a man, her body trembled gently. She had never had such an experience, so even though she was on her deathbed, her once pale face suffused a blush. As for her abdomen, it was close to her other private part. Having that touched resulted in a layer of goosebumps appearing on her smooth, porcelain-like skin. Despite Yi Yun's actions seeming frivolous, she knew that the places he pressed on were her dantian and heart. There was a slave worm located at each of the 2 spots. Could it be possible that Yi Yun was trying to remove the slave worms from her body? Ji Shuiyin found it unbelievable. Yi Yun practiced orthodox cultivation techniques. It was apparent from the oasis that grew around him when he was unconscious. How could such a person be knowledgeable in the art of witchcraft worms? Thank you, Senior. For Senior to kill my enemy, I'm already grateful for a lease of new life. As for the slave worms, Ji Shuiyan held no hopes. Yi Yun was probably trying his best to treat her, but without being proficient in the art of worms, how was he to extract them? Just as Ji Shuiyan was having such thoughts, she saw the black wheel in Yi Yun's eyes project out. One black mystical rune after another began swirling around Yi Yun's fingertips. Before she could react in time, the black runes had entered her body and reached her heart and dantian without any obstruction. The law of major destruction was the supreme law of the universe. The law's very existence meant the end of the universe. Since the law of major destruction could end everything in the universe and the universe itself, how could it not destroy mere worms? Although the Tao of witchcraft worms were mysterious, they were only minor Tao from Yi Yun's point of view. They were definitely incomparable to the law of major destruction. Although he did not know a thing about witchcraft worms, he could crush the Tao of witchcraft worms on the nomological level. After the black destruction runes entered Ji Shuiyan's heart and dantian, they silently condensed into a tiny 10,000 demon wheel of existence. Two 10,000 demon wheel of existence surrounded each worm respectively.